Bring in show music, please.
Hi, I'm CNBC producer Katie Kramer. Today on Squawk Pod. Trade talks overnight between President Trump and China's President Xi. The art of the deal? Former U.S. Ambassador to China Nick Burns joins us.
There's some real positives here. The negatives are this is not a trade deal.
And the president ordering nuclear weapons testing for the first time in decades.
The timing of that, a couple of hours before the two leaders sat down, had to be related to the leverage the U.S. wants to bring to the table. President Trump did say later it's about another country, Russia.
Finding happiness in life with Arthur Brooks.
We've changed our brains with the misuse of technology.
The Harvard business professor studies what brings us joy and what doesn't.
Political polarization is another thing that's actually just ripping us apart. You know, we're being effectively manipulated by the 5% extrinsic margins in politics who want us to fight each other.
How to build happy lives.
We actually need a rebellion of people who want to be happier.
Plus, Fed Chair Jay Powell sending a jolt through the markets when he said a rate cut in December isn't a foregone conclusion. Our Steve Liesman reports.
The real story here is the direction for cuts remains priced in. The pace is what's in question.
And ChatGPT parent OpenAI laying the foundation for a $1 trillion IPO. Can it be done?
You still have a lawsuit that's out there.
Got to solve a lot of things.
Many questions need to be answered beforehand.
It is Thursday, October 30th, 2025. Squawk Pod begins right now.
Stand Becky by in 3, 2, 1. Cue, please.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Squawk Box right here on CNBC. We're live from the NASDAQ market site in Times Square. I'm Becky Quick along with Andrew Ross Sorkin. Joe is out today. On this Thursday morning, we are looking at some red arrows. This is a pretty unusual occurrence. Red arrows in the morning. We've gotten used to the upward momentum and green all the time. Not the case this morning. Concerns about what the Fed is going to do next. Jay Powell saying it's not going to necessarily cut rates, that it's not the trajectory that is set in stone at this point.
Thank you very much. We will be having some discussions. I think we've already agreed to a lot of things, and we'll agree to some more right now. But President Xi is a great leader of a great country, and I think we're going to have a fantastic relationship for a long period of time.
And you can layer some more news like this on top of all of that. President Trump meeting with China's President Xi in South Korea. That took place overnight. In a post on Truth Social, President Trump described the meeting as, quote, truly great, and said that they agreed on many things and others were very close, he said, to being resolved. In that post, Trump said that China has begun buying massive amounts of soybeans, sorghum, and other U.S. farm products. He said that the flow of rare earth and critical minerals and magnets would also continue. He said that China would work with the U.S. to stop the flow of fentanyl. And he said that China has agreed to begin the process of purchasing American energy. Now, after the meeting, Beijing paused export controls on rare earth minerals, and the U.S. cut fentanyl-linked tariffs, bringing down the levy on Chinese exports now to 47%. That was, before this, at 57%. Trump said that the two sides discussed, quote, a lot of chips, but not the most advanced Blackwell chips from NVIDIA. Trump also said that he's going to China he's going to go back to China, or I shouldn't say back to China, he was in South Korea, but he's going to go to China in April, and that would be followed by a visit from President Xi to the United States. And later this hour, we're going to speak to former ambassador to China, Nick Burns, about all of this. Still trying to get clear on all of the details of the deal. It's not clear that China has confirmed all of these details yet either, so I think we're going to have to wait a little bit to see what's really going on.
I think a big part of this is de-escalation, right? At least putting everything on hold, stand down on both sides in terms of what they're going to be withholding from each other and in terms of some of the worst things that they've thrown on top of each other. There were escalations, things like taxes on shipping when ships came into port that both sides had put on, started by the United States and then followed up by China. Those have come back down for a year. The rare earths issue is a huge one. If that's on hold for a year, that's a big deal too. But so many different issues to talk through, and these are not issues that can get worked out in a matter of weeks like you might see with some other countries. These are big talks. Nick Burns, as you mentioned, the former ambassador, will be on with us later. He has concerns about security issues, particularly related to the export of chips. And we'll talk to him about all of those issues. Separately, President Trump posting last night about nuclear weapons. He said that because of testing programs from other countries, namely China and Russia, the United States is going to begin testing our nuclear weapons on an equal basis starting immediately. President Trump didn't mention specific countries, but the announcement follows reports yesterday that Russia had successfully tested a nuclear-powered, nuclear arms-capable Poseidon torpedo. The United States hasn't conducted a live nuclear weapons test since all the way back in 1992, when then President George H.W. Bush imposed a unilateral testing moratorium.
So that's hard to model out.
Yes.
In terms of what this really all means. And is this just an effort to sort of show others what we're doing? And the juxtaposition of the timing, though, to me is so odd.
Right before the talks, you mean?
Well, to have this moment where here he's coming back saying, we just had these fabulous talks on tariffs. We're doing this, this, and this, and this. But by the way, we're going to start, testing our nuclear weapons. I mean, that's like a next level kind of situation. And how connected or completely disconnected are those two things? Well,
Russia is a key in all of this. Russia is testing the Poseidon weapon at the same time, kind of trying to threaten to say that, as we start these talks with Ukraine, too,
right,
as we try and push peace talks through with Ukraine. So nothing anybody wants to see, a reversal to where we've been over more than 30 years at this point with holding things off. But you probably can't ignore what's happening from these other countries and the provocations that are taking place, too.
OpenAI preparing for an IPO that could value the company at up to $1 trillion. That is with a T. It's according to a report from Reuters. Citing three sources familiar with the matter, it said that OpenAI is considering filing for a public offering as soon as the second half of 2026. And that it could use the injection of capital to fund CEO Sam Altman's plans to pour trillions of dollars into AI infrastructure. A spokesperson for OpenAI said, quote, an IPO is not our focus, so we could not possibly have set a date. So hold your horses, folks. But I also wouldn't be surprised if, look, at some point, they do need to create an enormous amount of value, not just for the shareholders that are involved, but ultimately to finance these grand ambitions. This is one of the ways you would do it. And in the same way, when we were talking to Sam Altman's great friend, Brian Chesky, everything is being pulled up as quickly as humanly possible. So the sooner, the better. I can't imagine that nobody ever internally ever floated the idea of, could we make this happen in 2026? Yeah, if we did it, probably wouldn't happen in the beginning of 2026. I don't think they're ready for that.
Right.
Could it happen by the end of 2026? Maybe.
I think people also looking at the deal with Microsoft that was announced earlier this week as maybe potentially starting to clear the way on some of these issues. Of course, you still have a lawsuit that's out there.
Got to solve a lot of things.
That many questions need to be answered beforehand. But I think people look at it and say the steps are starting to be laid out to clear the path for it. Shares of Microsoft are under pressure this morning. Earnings came in at $3.72 a share. That beat the estimates of $3.67. Revenue also topping expectations. They were boosted by a 28% jump in revenue from its cloud unit. Microsoft saying that its investment in OpenAI resulted in a $3.1 billion hit to net income in the quarter. The company's CFO saying that capital spending growth in 2026 will be above the 2025 rate. She had previously said there'd been a slowdown in spending growth, but these are some of the questions. If you listen to any of these conference calls last night, Mark Zuckerberg from Meta talking about this too. All of these companies basically saying it doesn't matter how much we spend, we can't keep up with the demand for this, but it does change the perspective of these companies as being capital-light companies. They've always been capital-light companies. That's been a huge part of the reason for the investment thesis behind it. They are convinced at this point that this spending will lead not only to market share growth, but to more profit down the line. And Mark Zuckerberg talked about that, too. But you can see shares of Microsoft down by about 2 3/4%. Then you've got shares of Google parent Alphabet that are sharply higher this morning. Earnings of $3.10 a share beat the estimates of $2.33. Revenue, $102.4 billion, beat estimates of just under $100 billion. The company exceeded expectations for almost every metric, including YouTube ad revenue, Google Cloud revenue, which was probably the most important one, this idea that their cloud can now compete with the likes of an Amazon, or Amazon or Microsoft, and that's been a big question. They have not been really seeing the same growth. Their growth was stronger than those other companies this time around. Also, search revenue. The strong search revenue was another key, signaling that AI hasn't yet cannibalized Google's core search business, and that stock is up by 7%, which is kind of amazing to think of what that means in terms of market cap.
And then there's shares of Meta. Meta Platforms lower earnings of $7.25 per share. It beat estimates of $6.69, revenue beating estimates. But the company reported a one-time tax charge of nearly $16 billion. That was related to the implementation of President Trump's so-called One Big Beautiful Bill. The company said that the law would result in a significant reduction in tax payments for the rest of this year and in future years as well. Now, Meta raising its guidance for capital spending. It now expects to spend between $70 billion and $72 billion in 2025, which is just such a remarkable amount of money to consider. For the past couple of quarters, up until this quarter, most investors were rewarding Meta every time that they announced they were going to spend more money. This was really the first quarter where you saw it. Right now, the stock down about 8%, 8.5%. That there's some concerns about effectively overspending. And the big distinction between Meta and Microsoft and Google is they have their own cloud platforms, their own infrastructure, if you will. Right. So they're able to offset some of the costs because they're effectively
what's coming in. Right.
They're selling access to their cloud. Meta doesn't have that. Right. So they're actually having to just pay for it wholesale themselves.
Right. And to those comments from the Microsoft CFO, Amy Hood, she would only say that the spending is going to be, the capex is going to be sequentially higher than in the September quarter. It was $25 billion in the September quarter. So if it's substantially higher, that puts it on track to spend well over $100 billion for the fiscal year. I think for those three companies, the spend just for the last quarter was $78 billion. So massive amounts of money that are being poured out, and you're right.
Coursing through
You've got the cloud to be able to immediately amortize some of that. That's one thing.
It's just a different business.
Yeah.
And it's going to be interesting to see what happens. But look, the advertising business at Meta is still firing on all cylinders. That's the remarkable part. I think it's just people starting to get a little anxious just about how much money you're going to spend. And the idea, Mark said yesterday, he said, it's not that we're just going to be spending this, we're going to spend even more down the line.
He said he thought it was something that would lead to additional profitability, no question. Right. Just that no matter how quickly they build this, again, you can't build this stuff fast
I think the issue is that I think a lot of investors, there's sort of a conceit. The conceit in the Valley is if you build it, they will come. We will build all the stuff and we will figure it out. And I think there's a question about how much patience the investor class is going to have.
Right. Or when that sentiment changes, because when sentiment changes for stuff like that, it happens quickly. It
happens overnight. It happens when one company all of a sudden can't meet its bills, and then everyone says, okay, well, maybe everyone else can't either.
Never mind. Right. We've watched this play out again and again with Meta, even when it changed its name to Meta and went with Metaverse.
Totally.
But you've seen it with Netflix and other companies too, and Amazon at different points. There are times when investors will reward the idea of growth and patience, and times where they get pretty impatient themselves.
Let's talk about what the Fed is doing right now. The Fed cutting rates by a quarter point as expected, and now the focus turning to the December meeting. But another cut may not be such a sure thing. Want to get more from CNBC's senior economics reporter, Steve Liesman. I'm so curious about what you thought after we heard so directly in terms of some of the commentary from Jay Powell yesterday afternoon.
Well, the quarter point cut brought the funds rate down to 3.75 to 4%. That's the lowest level since rates were jacked up to fight inflation back in 2022. But investors are left with the question of what's it going to take for the Fed to cut in December? Fed Chair Jay Powell was definitive that a cut was not a done deal.
We have, strong views across the committee. And as I mentioned, there were strongly differing views today. And the takeaway from that is that we haven't made a decision about December. And, we're going to be looking at the data that we have, how that affects the outlook and the balance of risks. And I'll just say that.
So what was different? Well, there was the lack of government data. Committee members, as we reported yesterday, were split on the outlook and whether the bigger concern is growth or inflation. Growth data has been relatively strong. The jobs data could just be cooling and not falling off a cliff, reflecting the committee's divide. Even the vote to cut rates this month came with two dissents, one by new Fed Governor Stephen Miron. He's on unpaid leave from the Trump administration. Once again wanted a 50 basis point cut. And from the other side, by Kansas City Fed President Jeff Schmidt, favoring no rate change at all. Chance of a December cut falling from 84% before the press conference to 73% now, so it's still the odds-on bet. But the probability that it happens in January rising from 42% to 85%. So the real story here is the direction for cuts remains priced in. The pace is what's in question. Despite Powell's comments yesterday, several Wall Street firms, including J.P. Morgan, Goldman, and Barclays, continue to forecast that December cut, with most believing what will happen is the alternative jobs data will weaken enough to support a move. Andrew?
So help me with this. You talk about what was priced in. This doesn't seem like it was priced in. Why do you think the market was caught so offside?
You know, sometimes, Andrew, I think the market hears what it wants to hear. You get a little momentum going in the forecasting out there, and everybody says, well, this guy's banking on it. The market's got it priced in. And what I think they didn't do is take a step back and listen to what committee members were saying. We looked at 3 Fed presidents, voting Fed presidents, who had expressed some concern or some caution about cutting down the road. The other interesting thing here is the market may be too focused on the median estimate from the Fed's forecast of the dot plot. If you look at it, 3 rate cuts was the median, but then look at the actual spread. 7 members wanted 1 or no cut. 9 members wanted just 1 more cut. And so the 3 were not in the forecast there, Andrew. So I think people are seeing what they want to see, hearing what they want to hear, especially with the momentum in the stock market, and saying, well, everything's going to be great, instead of taking a step back and saying, well, what's really going on? It's tough work. There's 19 folks talking, but you can figure it out, as we did yesterday.
Are you surprised that he was so open about the dissension?
I think yes, in a way, he was. And I think it's an interesting question, if you want to get a little more technical, Andrew, the idea that all of the forward guidance now comes from the chair. It's not in the statement. Very difficult, obviously, to put the lack of consensus on the outlook in the statement, but it's Powell who gives that. And I think the story was that he felt a real need to claw back that flexibility and to bring the market off of its certainty over that rate cut. He did exactly what you said. He kind of stepped out and specifically said, we are not done on this, and the market is wrong on this, or at least the market is too certain about this. I think that's where we are. They may end up cutting, Andrew, but I think there has to be some resolution about the outlook for the economy and this dispute between should the Fed be more concerned about inflation or the jobs report. And the jobs data we have is just not that bad or that concerning right now.
The professor, thank you. Always. You make it clearer.
Pleasure.
Better than anybody I know. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Cheese will be next.
Coming up next on Squawk Pod, what came out of President Trump's meeting with President Xi? Former ambassador to China, Nick Burns, says maybe don't call it a deal. Plus, the chips factor in national security.
President Biden prohibited 3 years ago this month the sale of these chips. And why did he do that? Because the Chinese companies would then give those chips to the People's Liberation Army.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to Squawk Pod from CNBC. Today with Becky Quick and Andrew Ross Sorkin. Here's Andrew.
The high-stakes meeting in South Korea between President Trump and President Xi, resulting in deals, we think, on rare earths, fentanyl, and tariffs. Joining us right now is Nicholas Burns. He's a former U.S. ambassador to China, a professor at Harvard University. I said we think because we've heard from President Trump. We haven't fully heard from the Chinese on all of these issues just yet. And so I'm curious, just read the tea leaves for us.
Not a lot of detail, but I think where we are is an uneasy truce in a long, still simmering trade war.
Okay.
I mean, on the positive side, they met, and that's actually very important. They hadn't met since 2019. If you want to get any decisions out of the government of China, you have to meet with Xi Jinping. So I actually thought that was positive. President Trump's going to be going to China in April. Xi Jinping will come to the U.S. in the autumn. In diplomacy, this is structural. It's foundational. Positives, fentanyl, leading cause of death in our society, Americans 18 to 49. The majority of the precursor chemicals come from China. So Xi Jinping said, we'll help you on fentanyl. He made the same commitment to President Biden when we met with him just last year. I hope the Chinese are going to meet this commitment.
Did they do it after they made the commitment to Biden?
There was a progress on shutting down online selling platforms of these precursor chemicals, and they're exported by the Chinese black market into the drug cartels. And they make the synthetic opioid. They arrested some people, but not enough progress. So both Presidents Biden and Trump have been trying to push them on fentanyl. And let's see if the Chinese will come forward with better action. Progress on agricultural sales. This is important. 1/5 of all U.S. ag exports go to China. 2 years ago, $41 billion in sales, $14 billion of which was soybeans. So obviously the American farmer has been hurting. The Chinese have played hardball. There's been no purchases. So I think this is probably the most substantial achievement of the meeting they just had. And then, of course, the Chinese agreed they'll suspend the export controls that they put on their rare earth metals. That would have roiled global supply chains. So I think there's some real positives here. The negatives are this is not a trade deal. And if there was a trade deal, a comprehensive trade deal, they would have announced it. So I would expect further, almost like two boxers in the ring sparring.
Give me the split screen of this. So we, at the very top of this hour, 6 o'clock, we talk about this potential tariff framework, followed by news that President Trump is announcing that we're going to begin testing nuclear weapons again, live for the first time in decades.
In 3 decades.
What does that mean in this context? The fact that announcement came within hours of this trade framework.
That we're still sparring, that we're still trying to gain leverage over each other. I mean, the timing of that, a couple of hours before the two leaders sat down, had to be related to the leverage the U.S. wants to bring to the table. President Trump did say later it's about another country, Russia. And what it means is, and we've been at this since 1963 in prohibiting nuclear testing, that whole regime is breaking down between the United States and Russia. China comes into it because China is engaged in the largest buildup of its nuclear weapons force of any country in nuclear weapons history. They're trying to reach parity with the U.S. by the 2030s. So the fortunes and the balance of power among these 3 countries, the United States, Russia, and China, is very carefully calibrated.
But so the timing of this, you think, speaks to does it speak to the tariff issue and whatever the relationship is with China, or it doesn't? I mean, I think to the extent that he's suggesting it's related to Russia, I understand that, but the timing is so close.
I do not believe it was coincidental. I think the timing had to be. You're about to sit down with Xi Jinping. You haven't seen him in 6 years. You announce this major development that changes potentially American policy. I think it was intentional because there are a lot of unresolved issues in this relationship. The Trump administration rightly opposes what the Chinese are doing to help the Russians in the Ukraine war. There are problems on Taiwan. The president said that actually didn't come up.
You think that this was a message that was sent to say back off from helping the Russians when it comes to Ukraine?
Well, also that the United States is concerned about China's buildup of nuclear weapons. They're completely opaque. They refuse to talk to us at any meaningful level.
Did they do nuclear testing?
Pardon?
Did they do nuclear testing?
They have in the past.
Yeah.
They haven't done it recently, but they have in the past. So I think you're looking at a relationship that's forming. There's some good news in the announcements on fentanyl and ag sales and the others, but there are a lot of differences here that have prevented them from getting to a trade deal.
President Trump said yesterday that they discussed high-end chips, not Blackwell,
right,
which is the best that NVIDIA currently has to offer. What are your concerns about what we should be giving them, what we should not be giving them?
The Chinese are trying desperately to convince the Trump administration to allow the export of advanced American semiconductors for AI purposes into the Chinese market.
So not the H-20, but the...
Not the H-20. Yeah. In fact, the Chinese didn't even buy the H-20. Right. And that was another drama. But this is very important for American national security. President Biden prohibited 3 years ago this month the sale of these chips. And why did he do that? Because the Chinese companies would then give those chips to the People's Liberation Army to basically try to have a technological leap over the U.S. military in our long-running competition for who's the biggest and most important tech power. And so this is extremely important.
Jensen Huang and others in the industry have argued that if you are not giving them, not necessarily the latest and greatest, but if you're not giving them any access to chips, that it will short circuit American dominance in this field over the long term that
The
you
Chinese,
ultimately
the
want.
Chinese do have access to memory chips, but not to the most advanced logic chips. Why? Because under the civil military fusion, any Chinese company has to transfer its technology to the PLA. And the PLA is trying to outpace the United States technologically in this big AI race, and we don't want to be the number 2 military power in the future. What I find unconvincing about the argument from NVIDIA is the entire Chinese strategy is to make the world more dependent on China and China less dependent on the United States. You might get a year of sales, 6 months of sales, but the Chinese will innovate and they'll kick NVIDIA and Intel, other companies out. So short-lived commercial progress, but what's at stake is the national security of the United States and preventing the PLA from competing with our military.
Nick, I want to thank you for coming in this morning. It's
Pleasure.
great to talk to you, especially on a morning like this.
Thank you.
You bet.
Next on Squawk Pod, reaching a treasured goal may be unsatisfying.
If you're living for the arrival at the goal, you're fooling yourself.
Arthur Brooks, Harvard professor and self-styled happiness guru, on the secret to life.
Olympic athletes typically have a clinical depression after they win their gold. It's even worse if you win the silver, by the way, because you're thinking about the gold for the rest of your life.
Happiness. It's all about the road we travel.
You got to build your life so that you're enjoying the journey all along the way.
This is Squawk Pod.
Up and Andrew, Q.
You're watching Squawk Box right here on CNBC. I'm Andrew Sorkin along with Becky Quick. Joe's off today. It is raining in New York City.
A lot.
And we had a little rain in the markets. Our next guest is going to be weighing in on the mood of the nation amid the government shutdown, AI-driven layoffs, maybe a little bit of New York City, capitalism versus socialism I want to get to.
There you go.
You always keep us happy. Harvard professor Arthur Brooks. He hosts the podcast Office Hours with Arthur Brooks. It is new, and you got to check it out if you haven't already. His latest book is called The Happiness Files. It, of course, is a New York Times bestseller, and we love having you here because you make us happy.
Well, thank you, and congratulations to you in
thank you.
1929. It's top in the charts, man.
We're trying to be happy.
It's wonderful.
Trying to be happy.
Reminding us of history.
We talked about actually what it means to be happy, and actually
Right.
that the journey of a project is actually what makes you happier than the success. Because I was saying to him that last week, even though the thing had done very well on the list, I said, oddly, I didn't actually feel as happy as I thought it would be.
And it came as a surprise. That's called the arrival fallacy.
I was alone. I was in a hotel in Richmond, Virginia when I got on the New York Times bestseller list, and a friend of mine called and said, I imagine you're so happy. And I said, I almost feel relieved and, in truth, a little lonely because I was by myself in this hotel in the middle of Richmond.
A hotel in Richmond.
And then so I was talking to him last night about what it means to be happy, and he said it's not about the arrival.
It's not. And this is a show watched by some of the most powerful people in business. They're the best show if you're a CEO to watch, of course. And everybody watching this show knows that if you're living for the arrival at the goal, you're fooling yourself. Now, many people watching us, they have a problem. It's called success addiction. That usually starts when you're a kid and you get, rewarded and you get attention from grown-ups because you do these amazing things. And then you start achieving and you start to really get your sense of reward from getting these accolades. And so you do well in school and then you go on to get these really good jobs. But the problem with all that is not just workaholism. It's based on this idea that you're finally going to arrive and then the bliss is going to be constant, and that's wrong. This is one of the reasons that Olympic athletes typically have a clinical depression after they win their gold. It's even worse if you win the silver, by the way, because you're thinking about the gold for the rest of your life. And so the important thing to understand is you got to build your life so that you're enjoying the journey all along the way.
And it's not just enjoying the journey. I think it's also having gratitude. I was reading something recently that said happiness is a compilation of gratitude minus envy.
Yeah.
So you have to be happy with who you are, what you have, and stop comparing yourself.
And that's
to
a hard
everybody
thing to
else.
do. We're evolved as a species. Homo sapiens has evolved to be ungrateful, suspicious, hostile, and afraid. And the reason is because in the Pleistocene, 250,000 years ago, our ancestors passed on their genes because of their negative emotions, not because of their positive emotions. You have to make an effort to be grateful. I mean, look, I study this stuff. I'm a professor of this stuff. And I found myself 2 weeks ago saying, first class on United Airlines has really gone downhill. What's wrong with me? It's like I'm such an ungrateful wretch. And the reason is because of my genetics. I'm designed to be ungrateful. And so everybody watching is, not everybody, but most people watching us have really charmed lives. They have really good lives. And their spouses always tell them, why don't you stop and smell the roses?
Right.
I bet you, Andrew, that your wife is like, Andrew, why can't you stop?
Yes.
Can't you just stop and enjoy it?
What's so interesting, though, about, by the way, we have so many, as you mentioned, super successful people who watch this broadcast who have gotten to the top of the mountain. They are at the top of the mountain.
Yep.
And for whatever reason, instead of just skiing down the mountain and saying, I got there, they want to stay there.
Yeah.
They want to go. They look up. They see another mountain.
There's got to be another mountain. Of course.
So what's that about?
That's all about the fact that your rewards come from winning. They come from winning the next thing. That's what we're built for progress.
That's an addiction.
It is, but it's also really how we're built. I mean, it's funny. There's a big mystery in the diet literature about why diets don't work. 95% of diets, approximately, you gain all the weight back, even though you lose the weight in the first place. The reason is because all of the gratification in a diet comes from the scale going down each day.
Right.
And then your reward for hitting your goal is never getting to eat what you like for the rest of your life. Congratulations.
Right.
Arriving at a goal is deeply, deeply unsatisfying, and it freaks people out. You get the corner office, you're the CEO, and you get all the headache of being the CEO, but you can't actually achieve that thing anymore. That you're not going toward your goal anymore, and that's a problem for happiness.
I got a different one for you. I don't know if you see on the screen here. We have a title. It says Arthur Brooks on Mood of Nation.
All right.
It doesn't feel like the nation's that happy.
Yeah, no.
It feels like there is a game of chicken going on as it relates to what's happening with government shutdowns.
Right.
There's polarization. There's questions, by the way, even now about capitalism, socialism, what system's working for people in their own happiness. What do you think is happening here?
So we have two problems with happiness. Happiness has been gradually declining in the United States since about 1990. So we're, 35 years in on a gradual decline of happiness. That's the happiness climate problem. And it has to do with the people are less likely to practice their religion. They're less likely to get married and have children. They're less likely to have close friends. And they're less likely to actually see their work as a calling than they ever did in the past. And the four habits of the happiest people are faith, family, friends, and work. Those are the big four. And you and I have talked about that. We've talked about this on the show 4 or 5 times. But then there's the storms, the weather of happiness. And this is something we really have to grapple with. Technology has changed the weather of happiness.
You're talking about this thing that we're all addicted to.
I've just finished a book that's coming out in March. This is the first stop. When this thing comes out in March, is we'll be talking about this and how we've changed our brains with the misuse of technology. That we're actually using the wrong hemisphere of our brain all the time, where we can't actually apprehend and understand the meaning of our lives, which is horrible.
What hemisphere are we using?
The left hemisphere of the brain is the things and tasks. The right hemisphere is the mystery and the meaning.
Yeah.
And we need to be living in real life, in real love relationships, and having metaphysical experiences such that we can understand the meaning of our lives. But the more time that we're glued to our devices using technology, the more that we're relegating ourselves to the wrong side of the brain.
Yeah.
Political polarization is another thing that's actually just ripping us apart. Right. We're being effectively manipulated by the 5% extrinsic margins in politics who want us to fight each other. And that kind of polarization is really hurting the mood of the nation a lot. We actually need a rebellion of people who want to be happier, rebelling against their own side, whatever that side happens to be. And that's a hard thing to do. This can persist it won't persist forever, but it's a hard thing and we need to do it.
You have been preaching an almost optimistic approach to our country for a long time.
Yeah.
I feel like we've known each other for some 15 years.
Yeah.
And you'd come in and you'd say, at some point, the country's going to turn. What is the turn?
Well, the turn, actually, these turns in history, and I'm not a historian, but what you do find is the mood of a nation tends to follow 50-year cycles. That's generally the case. And 2022 looked an awful lot like 1972.
1972, you're putting us. Okay.
Wait a second.
Yeah.
Wait a second.
What was the happiness index then?
Yeah, it was very low.
Are you telling me it's going to be a long time?
Yeah, it's going to be a long time, but here's the good news, that we tend to actually have sort of an apogee when we get into the 25-year mark. So it's like...
Well, actually, I'm happy now.
Yeah,
so
yeah. I mean,
whatever.
Well, this is a broader point. Happiness is not a societal phenomenon. It's an individual phenomenon.
Right.
And so each person watching us can say, the mood of the nation, it's all screwed up. New York City's going to have a socialist mayor or I don't like the president of the United States or whatever they're talking about. You want to fix that? Pay attention to your relationship with the divine. Go hang out with your kids. Go make better friends.
Okay, but let me throw a new element into the mix that did not exist literally 36 months ago.
Yeah, tell me.
Artificial intelligence.
Yeah, man.
Your new friend is this.
Yes, I know.
Right?
This is really what I'm reading off
and that's what I'm concerned about. And by the way, if the new friend is as successful as some of these valuations would suggest, we all may not actually go to work with friends because we won't have jobs. And so I think there's a lot of also anxiety out there around all of this.
There's a lot of anxiety about that. There will be perturbation of the economy. There will be dislocation. That's going to happen. It always happens with technology. But here's the thing for each one of us to understand. We're all interacting now individually with AI. We are. And anybody who isn't is just behind the curve, and they're going to need to. It's you're going to either use it wrong and it's going to make you miserable, or you can use it right and make your life.
What does that mean? Tell us how to use it right then.
So the artificial intelligence or any tech is an adjunct to the left side of your brain, which is your tasks. It's never going to help you or complement the right side of your brain, which is mystery and meaning and love.
Yes,
it
don't
won't.
use Sora to
It
make a
won't.
bunch of pornographic videos.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Right. So if you're using it to free up your time so you can go spend more time with your kids and your spouse, good for you. If, on the other hand, you're using it as your lover or your friend or your therapist, you're going to get sad and anxious and lonely. And the reason is your brain knows it's being used incorrectly. Even though you don't know it, your brain's going to...
That's interesting. So I have a bunch of friends, and this is not me, but I do have a bunch of friends who talk...
chatbots?
No, who talk about using this as a therapist of sorts.
It can't be done.
Yeah.
And have argued to me, actually, that it's been quite successful. In fact, I was just talking to somebody the other day who said that they thought that they had a human therapist,
right,
and they thought that they were using ChatGPT, and they thought that this understood them better.
Yeah, that means they have a crummy therapist.
Are you a fan of therapy?
No, I mean just in general. I think that there's a role for. I mean, of course,
for extreme situations. But
yeah, of course,
like
mental health treatment is so incredibly important. Thank God for psychiatric care in this country. It's saved the lives of members of my family, to be sure. But the way that a lot of people use therapy today is to eradicate problems in their life. Mm-hmm. You go to therapy a lot of the time, you say, I'm sad and anxious.
You get sadder and more anxious.
Wrong. If you go to the campus counseling center at your university and you say you're sad and anxious, they're gonna try to treat you because it's a liability problem. Look, I tell my students at HBS, you're studying at Harvard. If you're not sad and anxious, you need therapy. Right. It's a hard thing to do, and good for you for doing this hard thing. We have a pain eradication, a suffering eradication mentality, and that's a mistake.
I got a different one for you.
What?
It seems like people are more medicated than ever.
Yeah, they are. They are. They absolutely are. And part of the reason for that is because the industrial complex around mental health today has talked about elimination of pain. And the truth of the matter is you won't find the meaning of your life if you don't understand suffering. Your suffering is sacred. It can be disproportionate. It can be dysregulated. There are people who actually absolutely need these drug regimens, which have been miraculous and saved a lot of lives. But many, many, many people are turning to them as opposed to understanding the meaning of what their life is all about. Life on Earth has a lot of suffering in it, is the bottom line.
Maybe the good news is people are drinking less.
People are drinking less. There's a
Self-medicating.
lot more cannabis. And this is also something that I really admire about young people today among my students. They're using actually mostly fewer substances than people of my generation. Because the truth is anything that is euphoric is neurotoxic.
Right.
And so you have to be very serious about the decision making that you have. Now, you can make the decision, I'm going to have a glass of wine. Good for you. But the truth is if you're bored or anxious and that's the reason you're using euphoric substances, it's going to lead to trouble.
Right.
You just started a new podcast. You've become a member
podcaster.
You're a podcaster now.
Yeah.
You happy about that?
It's super fun because what I'm doing. Well, I've been writing a column in the Atlantic for a long time called "How to Build a Life" every Thursday morning. I have 275 columns in the bank, which means I've done the work, I've done the research on this, and in my podcast I talk about different areas of happiness in depth. Mostly I'm talking to the camera. Sometimes I have some guests, and that can be pretty popular too. But the most popular podcast that I've done so far is I talked about my 6-part neuroscience-based morning routine for greater happiness and wellness, and it got millions of viewers, got millions of listeners on the basis of that.
We could use that morning routine. Can you do that morning routine if you host a morning show?
It sort of depends on what morning means to you. I mean, you get up at 4:30.
I'm up at 4:30. She's up at 3:30.
You're
I
up
think.
at 3:30 a.m.
3:45.
It's 3:45. You get an
That's a
extra
big
15 minutes.
difference.
That's a game changer, isn't it,
And
Becky?
some days I sleep till 4.
Yeah, I get up at 4:30, and it's really important. The key thing to remember is that your day is much better if you get up before the sun, and there's a lot of neuroscience research on that. And then you have to design your day around the rhythms that you've got for your work, to be sure. But I work out super hard first thing in the morning, and then I go to mass every morning. And then so I've got, wake up before the sun, body and soul.
Did you do that this morning before you came here?
Yeah.
Wow.
And and this is great. This show's perfect for my schedule, as a matter of fact, because and I'm not a natural morning lark, by the way.
Yeah, me neither.
I thought all the way through my 20s I was a night owl. Well, it turned out I was just a musician who drank too much, and
I will say this routine saves you in some
It's
ways. It
really-
kills you slowly by the lack of sleep you get, but it does save you in other ways.
that's because this morning starts last night.
Well, I'm glad that this works for you. So come on back.
I love it.
Thank you.
Favorite show. Thank you.
Appreciate
See, we
it.
don't need therapy because we have you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Arthur.
Thanks.
And that is Squawk Pod for today. We're happy when you listen. Thank you for doing it. Squawk Box is hosted by Joe Kernan, Becky Quick, and Andrew Ross Sorkin. Tune in weekday mornings on CNBC at 6 Eastern to get the smartest takes and analysis from our TV show right into your ears. Please follow Squawk Pod wherever you get your podcasts. We'll meet you right back here tomorrow.
We are clear. Thanks, guys.